You are a nutritional therapist and you're also the CEO of Lifecode GX, which is a company that offers a range of specialist nutrigenomics DNA tests. So we will explain what nutrigenomics DNA tests are, but to make it very simple, with these tests, you can find out how the genes that you inherited from your parents could lead to potential health risks depending on what you eat and what your lifestyle is. So these tests are very useful because if you have the results of the test and follow the recommendation, you are actively increasing your chances of either staying healthy or becoming healthier. Do I get it right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Wonderful. Also a writer and a lecturer in nutrigenomics. How did you get into genetic testing?
I worked for many years in corporate jobs, which was very stressful. And like a lot of people now, I decided that I'd had enough of that career. I didn't want to do it anymore. It was not very fulfilling and I wanted to do something that I cared about. So I'd always been quite into fitness and I decided I wanted to study nutrition. And I thought that would give me lots of options and give me some maybe ideas about what to do next. So that's what I did. I did a part-time nutrition course. And when I did that course, there was a lecture on nutrigenomics, which is what we're talking about. And it absolutely inspired me. And that was the moment when I just knew this was the reason that I'd done the course. This is what I'd been hoping for, was that thing that would click with me, that I really wanted to do. And that was about 6 years ago now.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, time's flown. And by the time I'd actually finished the course, we had actually set up the company and produced our first report. And we've changed a lot since then. But the initial report, we used a company called 23andMe, which people might have heard of. It's a direct-to-consumer testing. And we were able to use the data from those tests to produce a report that actually meant something, that that converted and translated all the dry data into something that was usable and could, you know, make a real difference to people's health. But then we got a little bit limited by using that model. They didn't test for the things that we really wanted to look at. And we were concerned about privacy and security and all of that. So we then produced our own test and we provide that full service so that it is totally confidential, it's totally secure. We can choose what we want to test and what we want to include. And we've just really built on that over the kind of 5 years of the company to extend our testing and also try and make the test more and more relevant to people, because that's the whole point.
Yeah, exactly. It's for people. It's used by health professionals, but it's for people. So the reports have to mean something so that they can use it. Could you explain what genomics and nutrigenomics are in simple terms, please?
Genomics is the study of DNA, and DNA is your genetic code. So it's just sequences of letters that are arranged on chromosomes, and those letters instruct your body how to produce proteins or liver cells or brain cells or whatever your body does. The DNA is the instruction. So that's genomic. Nutrigenomics is a special subset of genomics, which is about things that are either impacted by food or can be impacted in a good way, influenced by food or lifestyle. So it includes sleep, activity, psychosocial impacts as well. But the whole idea is that everything that we test for, there is a kind of antidote to it if it's negative. there is a suggestion as to how any result that looks as if it is a weakness in the DNA. So this is what we're looking for. We're kind of going, where are my weak points? Where are these persons' vulnerabilities? Because we can support them and we know what can be done to support them. So that's really the whole point. Whereas genomics more generally may often be used to explain a condition or to detect an illness that is destined to happen and that the science doesn't know what to do to prevent that yet. And so we've got the nice job, really.
Could we link that into epigenetics?
So epigenetics simply means over the genes. And that's really about how our environment interacts with our genetics. So our genetic code is fixed and we can understand that. So we can understand the shape of the code and therefore how that interacts with our environment. And so the epi is the environmental part and the whole thing is how it comes together and therefore what the result of that could be. And some things are very strongly likely to happen and other things are very, well, it could be like this or it could be like that. And I think of it as being your code is where your default position is. So if you had a bead on a wire, your code is telling you where is the starting position. Or you're on a grid, you're on the starting grid on the Formula One. Where are you on the grid? Where's your starting position? And when we know that, we know how much effort is needed to be taken to put you in pole position and give you the best chance of being the healthiest you can.
So it's like switching on and off the genes.
And there might be some things you want to switch off and there might be some things you want to switch on. And some things get switched off naturally for some people, depending on their genetics. So, for example, lactose in milk, the milk sugar, most people in the world, their ability to digest the sugar in milk, the lactose, is stopped once they stop breastfeeding. So at age 3, the body says, hey, I'm going to put my resources elsewhere. I don't need to be able to continue to do this. So that is how genetically we all started off. But because in some geographical regions, we started to farm animals and we started to be able to milk animals, it was beneficial to our survival to be able to take advantage of that food source. And so our genes in some people adapted so that we could drink milk. And it's very, very regional and geographical. But because more and more we're mixing, populations are mixing. So we travel and we marry people from different backgrounds and all of that. So we're a mixture more and more of these genes. And so it's not so clear without doing a genetic test which genes you have inherited.
Basically, in most situations, we can't change our genes, but we can turn them on and off depending on what we eat and our lifestyle.
Yeah, we can support them. Some people can be out in the sunlight, the same as another person, but they might have a low level of vitamin D and the other person might have a really high level or really good level. And they've both had the same exposure, but because they've got different genes, their body is able to hold on to that vitamin D better or worse. But if we know about the better or worse to start with, then we can identify that that person is maybe more vulnerable to having low vitamin D than the other person, and therefore support them. And that individual would know that for them, vitamin D is a top nutrient to be aware of. It's one of their vulnerabilities, therefore be proactive about getting enough of it.
Let's move to women entering midlife. and
Yes.
perimenopause, menopause, all these things we love. I mean, I love at least.
I
So,
do too.
oh, that's great. Which what test would you typically recommend to a woman entering midlife?
There are tests that are directly involved in hormone
Mm-hmm.
balance. And for example, an estrogen balance test, you can do a genetic test, and because your code is fixed, you could look at that test when you're 35,
Mm-hmm.
and then you could review it again when you're 45, and again when you're 55, without paying any money to do it again. Those results are still valid, but you are looking at them from a different perspective as a woman. So in your 30s, you might have genes that promote the making of estrogen, and maybe contribute to high estrogen.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have genes that remove estrogen less efficiently, and so high estrogen might be a problem. And if you know that, you can choose certain foods that can reduce or level out or balance the estrogen, or you can choose or be aware at least of lifestyle aspects that might push the estrogen in certain directions, and have maybe certain estrogens that aren't that good for you. When you get to perimenopause, usually women, whatever age they are experiencing perimenopause, will have a more volatile hormonal phase. So before it goes down, it will be more rocky. And during that phase, it's more important than ever to be aware of how to try and balance out your hormones. And I think of it as being, instead of, you don't want it kind of like a really rocky, stormy
Mm-hmm.
experience.
Yeah.
You want it to be a nice little wavy. It's kind of,
Smooth and
exactly,
easy.
exactly. And if you learn what your genes are like with respect to how they make and process estrogen, the sooner you learn that, then you can start to apply these tricks and tips and support mechanisms to balance it out. And it might be that certain times in your cycle, you want to use more broccoli sprouts or broccoli foods, for example, brassicas, because that can help lower estrogen, but you don't want to necessarily have as much of that all the time, because you don't want to sap all your estrogen out when it's at its lowest. And of course there are other hormones as well. So I think by learning to balance your estrogen and remove that rockiness, you're not going to experience as many unpleasant symptoms during that period of your life, during that transition stage. And then when you get closer to menopause, or you might be thinking about how to support yourself after menopause, in terms of considering HRT, for example. And the genetic test can inform you about how your body will process those estrogens. They're still estrogens, however you get them, whether you get them naturally, whether you're exposed to maybe not really great estrogens in the environment. So, in our water, for example, in our packaging, those are all estrogens, but they're not necessarily the sorts of estrogens that you really want.
The xenoestrogen, yeah.
Exactly, and your body can respond to them in an unhealthy way. So we want to optimize our ability to remove estrogens like that, and be really efficient at doing it, without sapping the benefit of the estrogen.
Absolutely.
So I think an estrogen or hormone balancing DNA test is so insightful and so powerful to equip people to manage any rockiness, and that could be at any stage of life, to be honest. It's just that if you've historically had a bit of a rough deal in terms of menstrual cycles and hormones, then it's, unless you get to the root of that problem and learn what works for you to balance it, then it may well be even worse during perimenopause.
Yeah,
And
everything
then,
gets worse during perimenopause. So you better manage your hormonal cycle as best as you can before, so that you limit
yeah,
the damages
yeah,
thereafter. Yes.
yeah, exactly. And the other thing around perimenopause is because of that volatility, or related to that volatility, that puts stress on various different parts of your systems as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it can put stress on your central nervous system, your brain, and you just might not be able to cope with the same sort of environmental stresses
Mm-hmm.
as you used to be able to. You might just snap more easily, you might feel more moody and all of that. And it's because your hypothalamus, a part of your brain, is trying to do its best to balance out these hormonal messages.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a bit of a bombardment. So the more bombardment is happening there, the more difficult it is to balance other things like the thyroid, for example. So it's about respecting the fact that this is a potentially volatile time, trying to smooth it out, but also giving yourself the best chance to weather that storm in the best possible way.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, other things that might happen with menopause itself is we know that those hormones are very supportive. So they have real functions and real jobs to do. And one of the ways that estrogen, again, supports your system is it can help your body make something called choline. And choline is important for cellular health. And it's also important for mental health. So it can make acetylcholine, which is a major neurotransmitter.
But can't we eat choline from eggs?
We can. So guess what? If you have a genetic type, a variance, in a gene that is supported by estrogen, then actually that variance can make that gene a weaker part of your system.
Okay.
The gene that I'm talking about is called PEMT. You don't really need to remember that.
No.
The PEMT gene basically is through your estrogen kind of happy years, is actually its function is supported by estrogen. Estrogen helps the body make choline. If you have a variance on that gene, you're naturally less good at that. And when and if that estrogen is lowered, then your support cushion is being removed, or the rug is being pulled from under your choline making machine. But there's a really easy solution for that for most people. As long as you don't have an intolerance or allergy to eggs, egg yolks are really great sources of choline.
Yeah.
You get choline in fish, you get choline in meat. So I'm aware that those are animal produce. So again, it might be more of a challenge if you don't eat animal foods.
Well,
you're French.
well, it's not about me. It's just, it's if we
Everyone,
want to be
yeah.
healthy, we make efforts. I hate liver, but I eat it because
Yeah,
one of the most nutritious food, you.
Very nutritious, absolutely, incredibly packed with nutrients of this kind. It doesn't mean you have to have it every day, but if you could have it every week or even every 2 weeks, that would be an amazing support.
Yeah, exactly. You start with one bite and then you get with years used to it.
Exactly. Have some broccoli with it and other things. So there is a very easy solution to knowing that genetically this is a weaker point. Heart health, so cardiovascular health, And we know that women, the risk of cardio events, so things like heart attack and strokes, in men in their 40s, it's much higher in men than women. Men are at higher risk. But over 50 or 55, that risk flips so that women have a higher risk of heart disease and cardiovascular events.
Typically post-menopause.
Yeah, exactly.
Tends to be like osteoporosis, it tends to be once the menopause has been reached.
Yeah, and it's because this choline is important for removing another chemical called homocysteine. Again, you don't need to remember these long chemical names, but the choline actually helps remove the toxin from the bloodstream, and that toxin, if it isn't removed, can damage the arteries. So it's kind of chipping away at the paintwork, but having enough choline, it's as if you're just keeping the paintwork in the blood vessels and the arteries really nice and smooth, and so the damage isn't done, and the risk of that sort of health issue is very much under control.
How do you take DNA tests?
So it's a cotton swab, so
the
easy.
cheeks.
Yeah, and it takes about a minute just to rub the inside of your cheek and collect cheek cells. So that is what is being collected. It's not saliva, it's the actual cells that are just really easy. And so it's painless, it takes a minute, and you just pop it in a little plastic tube and put it in a post box. So it doesn't need any special treatment, and it doesn't need freezing or couriering or anything like that. So
super easy, and results within a week, 2 weeks, or does it depend on the test? 2 weeks.
2 weeks, yeah. And then you can just go through the test results with your practitioner, which is so worth the money in terms of getting the value from that test.
Yeah, because if you, I mean, you provide the reports with each test results, but I think if you really want to gain the most of it, you need a health practitioner to work out how to implement all that, because having a list of things to do, sometimes it's overwhelming and you don't necessarily where to start because it's too much. So you want to start with what's manageable and then build on that. So yes.
Exactly. And some of the things like the PEMT and the choline that we talked about, they might have different levels of risk at different ages, as we've said. So if you're looking at that report when you're 35, you would have a different perspective than when you're 45 or 55. And that is what a health professional can guide you through.
You are part of the 25% of women who enjoy a happy perimenopause. Can you tell us more about that? Because I want to spread the message that it is completely possible to go through that. And I believe without HRT, am I right again?
Yeah. So I'm still on the journey. So I'm 52. I'm still cycling in a kind of irregular way. And I feel healthy. So I do feel quite lucky, because I think there are definitely genetic elements to this. And you can look at, your family history and look at other female members of your family and see what their experience was. So I think I was dealt a fairly lucky set of cards to start with. But I also know that I absolutely have some weak points, and that I have had to change aspects of my lifestyle through my 40s.
Such as, can you share with us?
So I used to do a lot of endurance sport, a lot. And I did that partly for mental health, actually. So I've always had an anxiety kind of trait or tendency. And I actually used running as a way to mentally calm down. But actually, I think I told myself that, but I was really doing a lot of miles, and I was doing it very intensively, and I was doing quite fast and quite long endurance running. And probably about 5 years ago, I was almost forced to halt it. Not because of an injury, but because I just I felt as if I was running through treacle. I just couldn't. I had
Oh,
no
wow.
energy anymore. And I did various tests. I obviously have the genetics.
Yeah.
And actually my body was doing its job properly because it was pushing back on the amount of stress and the amount of pressure and the amount of load that I was trying to put on it. And my thyroid system, without thyroid system, put the brakes on. So my thyroid put the brakes on. That is the defense mechanism when your system senses that this is unsustainable. And so all my tests kind of backed up that principle around stress, and that stress is not a good thing beyond a certain point. And I think that's definitely something that I had to acknowledge when I was kind of 48, 49. And I know now that if I forget about that, and my tendency still is to go, oh no, okay, I have forgotten about that. I'll kind of just take on more and more and more things. Actually, I do notice like mood swings, for example.
Mood swings. Okay.
Yeah. So I notice definitely my tolerance levels are lower, but also things like aches and pains. That stress has to come out somewhere. And when you're creating stress chemicals in your body, genetically, I have some traits that mean I respond differently to adrenaline. I have a more intensive response to adrenaline. So I create more stress chemicals. I'm not so good at removing them because of certain genetics. And so actually subjecting myself to that stressful situation is, even if it's not noticeable straight away, I know that internally it's creating a lot of toxicity, and that toxicity is a health risk for lots of things.
I just wanted to perhaps clarify that you and check if I'm correct, but you did two types of tests. You did the genetic test to assess, what are your genes, but also you probably did another test to assess your levels of various hormones, isn't it?
Yes, and it can be really powerful to put those tests together. So your genes can tell you, your genetic test can tell you, these are your weak points. And then you can use other tests to assess, how are you doing at supporting those weak points? Like, are you doing enough to support them, or are you actually doing things that are really kind of pummeling those already weak points and putting more pressure on them? And that's the difference. Those are how the two types of tests can complement each other. So, for example, if vitamin D looks like a vulnerable place for you, then you could do an actual test that looks at your current levels at a point in time and see what those levels are. But a functional test is at a point in time. It's for that minute, often as little as that. And with hormones, for example, we know that if you do a functional test, it's yes, at that minute when you took that test, that was what the test was telling you about your levels.
Coming back to your menopause, so you mentioned it's been very important for you to slow down in terms of exercise because you were a marathon runner, but you've also been always good with your diet. This is something you've mentioned, and also you started having less alcohol and caffeine because you found that it was helping as well.
Yeah. So I have a sensitivity to caffeine, and I've always known that, but sometimes I've just chosen to ignore it. But it makes me really jittery. So I know as soon as I've had a coffee that it's supposed to have that effect, right? It's a stimulant. So, but I know about it really, really clearly. And I still do have a coffee, but I definitely can't have more than one. A good barista coffee, one is enough. And I know that it's a really bad idea to go above that. Still do it occasionally, but it's
So
an occasional.
you know your limits, and that's what matters. You know that if
Yeah.
you're going to enjoy another one, then there will be side effects. So it's your choice ultimately.
Yeah.
And on the very positive news, you said that you have no weight gain and you've got good mood, good memory. So again, this is positive, and we need to bring really a lot of hope that not everyone will be in the same bag of having horrific menopause symptoms, but it does require really to listen to our body and to make some changes, which are not always easy. I completely agree with anyone. It's a choice.
If there are things that are my weakness, don't have lots of it in the house. Just don't.
Oh yeah, it's a danger.
Yeah,
I
just
agree.
don't have it there. So if I want to drink wine, I will deliberately go and buy a good bottle of wine rather than just have a whole lot of wine that's just there, so I can have it just when I've had a bad day. So I've had a bad day, rather than having it in that kind of sense. It's more about a celebration rather than something to turn to as a solace. And I go about and buy it for that reason deliberately, so that I have to consciously do it rather than just fall back on it because it's there. Just not buying junk food. Don't buy it. If it isn't there, you can't have it.
If you have to give one tip,
the more stress we're under, when our system is already trying to adapt to a shift in hormones, that is already stressful. So we've got that stress that we don't have any choice about, that our body is being kind of experiencing. So, but we also have optional stress in our life. And I think it's about assessing the optional stress and deciding what's worth it. Are you a stress seeker inadvertently?
So it's about figuring out what stress is actually having an impact on. So either it can be a physical stress, like running too much or too intense, or mental stress. Yeah. And also knowing if the stress is good stress or eustress, as we learned. Yeah. Or whether it's going the other way and it's preventing you from functioning optimally, basically. Okay. Yeah. Great. Thank you for that.
So I think the top tests for menopause are the nervous system test, and this is because we think about menopause as being all around hormones like the sex steroid hormones, but really they are the end product of the systems. And the nervous system and the hypothalamus and the pituitary tell the adrenals and they tell the ovaries what to do, and so they are the controllers. And so this comes back to protecting the controllers and protecting your nervous system so that you can handle the more volatile kind of aspects of perimenopause and then the adaptation to menopause. And so the nervous system test looks at how we regulate cortisol, the stress hormone, or one of the stress hormones, how we respond to adrenaline, which is the fight or flight, and how we process it. So how our body genetically, how capable it is of removing these things from the system once they've done their job. And if the genes aren't the best version, then, as we said right at the beginning, we've got solutions to support them. So that's the whole point, really. It's been able to identify what are the nutrients and what are the lifestyle adjustments that are going to give you as an individual personally the best benefit. That nervous system test is about the control center and giving the control center the best support and the personalized support, so that those moments when you feel like you're about to scream or snap or just lose it, then let's balance these neurotransmitters out in the same way we talked about the hormones, so that you're not topping out and you're not in that position you've got a kind of big buffer zone to work with. The estrogen balance is very relevant because it is about understanding how your body makes, responds to and processes that, and it will give you a way of informing your choice about things like HRT. You know, for some people it is life-changingly fabulous, and if they couldn't live without it, but there still might be some risks associated with doing that that can be reduced as much as possible if you understand what your body's doing with that hormone once it's in. And then the other one is methylation, which is this whole choline and heart health and
that you mentioned,
the mind health and the memory and the cognition that is related to that. Because, you know, again, the whole memory cognition aspect can be really, really disturbing to people, and they're just like, I've lost my train of thought. I never used to do that. What the heck is going on? And, you know, why are my keys in the fridge again? It can be really distressing. And if only you know that is a weak point for you, then you can choose a manageable number of places to really focus your effort in terms of nutrition and other lifestyle aspects, so that, you know, managing all of that in itself doesn't become overwhelming and another stressor. It's like you've got 3 top things, and they're the things that are going to make the biggest difference. And I think that's really helpful, rather than feeling that you've got to hit a really high bar and be the perfect, you know, person and never have a glass of wine and all of those things. You should be able to enjoy a little of what you fancy, and have a positive menopause and perimenopause.
So you've mentioned 3 tests. Are you offering the 3 tests as a package, or are there 3 different tests?
So you can do 1 sample and you can get 3 tests. It's cheaper.
So there is a discount.
Yeah. And if you work through a practitioner like yourself, then the practitioners can access those tests for you at a very favourable rate as well.
Which one would you recommend first and second and third if a person wouldn't have the budget to do all the 3 at the same time?
I think it depends where you are in your journey. And it also depends what symptoms or concerns you have in that journey. So, for example, if you've always had a little bit of a rocky time with menstruation and periods and all of that, then I would say go and do the Oestrogen Balance report, and that will reap benefits from the week that you get those results and discuss them and start to have that personalized approach to support. If it's kind of like a more of a mood thing or a memory thing, and that's what's bothering you, go start with the nervous system as the priority.
Information is power. You know, for those who haven't never done a genetic test, the report, your genes is just a sequence of letters and numbers, so it doesn't mean anything. But then you need to understand what it means, and that's the value of the report, and that's the value of working with a health professional, because they will tell you exactly what it means and what can be done because of this conclusion. Health, you know, it's always an investment in the future. It's just, you may be completely fine now, but you never know what the future is going to be. But when you're being proactive, at least you put all your chances behind you. So that's really the best thing, and I could highly recommend it. Do you think HRT has a place in menopausal women if they have genetic tests to work out how to potentially get rid of things like bad estrogens?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is one fairly common reason why people might want to do an estrogen balance genetic test. The genetics will show you, where is the estrogen going to go? What direction is it going to go in? Are there any blockages along the way? And you could almost think of it as water running down a hillside. Are there any stones in the streams that are going to cause the water to back up? And that's the same with the estrogen. First important thing is to identify those blockages and the gene test will tell you where your blockages are. And then the second is, what can you do? Remove that. And usually the solutions are quite straightforward. We have these lovely little visualizations of where the genes operate as well. So it's a visual picture of where this gene is and what it's doing. And if you can kind of take that in and go, when I go to the supermarket and look in the vegetable aisle, this is why I'm doing this. It's not, it's easier to just get into that habit then once you understand why you're doing it, rather than just being told to do it.
Yeah. I'm post-menopause, not had HRT. 3 years ago, developed perfume/fragrance sensitivity, mast cells, been taking gut supplements for 9 months, no change. I'm convinced it's hormones.
It could be related to histamine, which is a whole, we've got a test for histamine.
Okay, that's good to know.
People can have a problem degrading the histamine. So histamine has jobs to do in the body. There are foods that are high in histamine. And champagne is one of the highest histamine containing things. Yeah, sadly.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I've actually seen people drink champagne and literally like flush from nothing to have a really histaminergic response. So yeah, and red wine as well. So, all the good things, and chocolate. But women can become much more sensitive to histamine as well. And there are different reasons for that. Estrogens and histamine have a relationship with each other where they can reinforce each other. If you have unopposed estrogens, or you're making more estrogen and there is no opposition to that from progesterone, for example, then that estrogen, even though it's relatively low compared to what it may have been, could still be excessive in relative terms. We have on mast cells, so mast cells are the cells that release histamine and other immune responders. Mast cells have estrogen sensors on them. And so if estrogen is in the circulation and a mast cell is already quite volatile, so mast cells can be quite hypersensitive as well, then the estrogen interacts with those sensors and it releases histamine, affects many, many women. And they think exactly that, well, why not? And then the other aspect of all of this is, how well is the person able to detoxify and remove that histamine? And that can be down to genetics, but the genetics can be overcome. It can be about how much food that person is taking in optionally, that includes histamine, and also things like liver health. So how well supported is your liver, and what capacity has it got to help remove the histamine and the products of histamine? So it's about toxic load, liver support, and also methylation support. But I would work bottom up in that situation, and I would look at toxicity and the efficiency by which someone is able to remove toxins. So gut health, regular bowel movements, liver support, to really, really optimize that part of the process. And I would do what I could in terms of minimizing optional sources of histamine and optional external estrogen sources that might be in packaging, for example. Sensitivity to fragrances and smells is very much related to gut and liver detoxification capacity.
What type of supplements would you recommend to balance hormones during perimenopause?
Okay, I actually like that question. What I really like are supplements that include something called indole-free carbinol, or I3C for short. Yeah. You can get it in broccoli sprouts, are a really potent source of that, and it's really, really good for detoxifying estrogens. You can get the same chemical, the same substance in a concentrated form in supplement.
I just want you to be clear that you didn't start with the supplement, you started with the tests.
Yeah.
To figure out your levels, and then depending on your levels, you deciding on which supplement to take, and that's because you're a nutritional therapist, so you know what you're doing.
They can be very, very potent, you know. So
exactly.
we take these things and we're kind of expecting them to work, but we need to know what we're doing with them. They're really powerful. They are as powerful as a medication, and you wouldn't take a medication without advice.
And you have to know,
Yeah.
you know, which are the best ingredients, and the dosage, when to take it, when to stop it, and so it's not
exactly
because it's just a supplement you can buy over the counter.
If you use it and you don't need it, or you use too much of it, or you use it constantly, you could actually cause your estrogen levels to plummet, and you could suffer really, really bad symptoms by doing that. And you're actually then potentially causing more choppiness, with the best intention of smoothing the way. I really do advise against becoming a supplement junkie, and to try and do things as naturally as possible. Your body is designed to use these resources. And I know there are arguments about foods not being as nutrient rich as they used to be and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But food can be very powerful
and
safe.
And safer, yes, because they contain other nutrients that work together. So it's natural, and the body recognizes the form. Do you think we should take magnesium daily?
Magnesium is one of the ones that is safe to take regularly, and a lot of us are struggling to get adequate magnesium in the diet. And we also have increased need for magnesium. We're going to use it up more during perimenopause and menopause. It's very depleted by stress, for example. And it's very important to keep our brain firing in the right way.
What type of magnesium would you recommend?
I think magnesium glycinate as a form of supplement is a good one. One of my personal favourite things is an Epsom salt bath. I know some people don't like baths, but I love nothing more than a nice calm bath with salts. Read a book or don't read a book, listen to something, don't, and you absorb it through your skin. And you having, as long as you're a bath person, you're having an experience that is also helping you to be calm and relaxed and de-stress.
Thank you so much for all this. I have one very last question. Who do you think I should interview next?
Someone like Charlotte Hunter, nutritional therapist.
Nutritional therapist, yeah.
Yeah, someone who experienced a very sudden menopause, which I'm sure she talks about that a lot, and she's very interesting because she didn't used to really work with women. That wasn't really her focus of practice. And then because she personally had this quite dramatic experience that threw her into menopause literally overnight, and she found it so challenging to get advice and to obtain what she needed, it forced her to kind of reach out and get those resources and learn for herself. And now she's made it a big part of her nutritional therapy practice as well.
Emma, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you.